Steve Harvey thought he knew the Kardashians, until the moment Kendall Jenner looked him in the eyes and said the one thing that shattered the family's perfect image forever. The studio lights blazed with their usual intensity that Wednesday afternoon in Atlanta, casting long shadows across the polished floor of the Family Feud set. The familiar blue and gold backdrop gleamed under the hot television lights, while the audience buzzed with an electric energy that only came with celebrity tapings. Camera operators adjusted their angles, sound technicians checked their levels, and producers whispered last-minute instructions into their headsets. The Family Feud set hummed with anticipation as America's most famous family took their positions at the burgundy podiums. Kris Jenner stood confidently at the captain's spot, her trademark smile radiating the kind of media-trained perfection that had built an empire worth hundreds of millions. Her black blazer was immaculate, every strand of her perfectly styled hair in place. Beside her, Kim adjusted her fitted black dress for the cameras, her movements calculated and graceful, while Khloe cracked jokes that had the audience already laughing before the cameras rolled, her infectious energy filling the space around her. But at the far end of the Kardashian podium, something was different. Kendall Jenner stood quietly, her tall frame slightly hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. While her family basked in the warm studio lights and audience energy, she seemed to be somewhere else entirely, lost in a space between the spotlight and the shadows. Steve Harvey, resplendent in his navy blue suit and signature mustache, worked the crowd with the effortless charm that had made him America's favorite game show host. His presence commanded the room, not through force, but through genuine warmth and an uncanny ability to make every person feel seen and valued. For over 4 decades, he'd mastered the art of reading people, of finding the perfect moment to crack a joke or offer a gentle word. He'd hosted celebrities and everyday families, politicians and performers, athletes and artists. He thought he'd seen every type of person, every kind of story, every possible human emotion played out on his stage. He was wrong. The opposing team, the Martinez family from San Antonio, seemed almost starstruck as they faced off against reality TV royalty. Steve had started the introductions with his usual flair, working his way down the Kardashian line with practiced ease. Each family member delivered their expected sound bites. Kris, talking about family values, Kim mentioning her latest business venture, Khloe making everyone laugh with a self-deprecating comment about her dating life. Then Steve reached Kendall, and we have the supermodel herself, Kendall Jenner. Steve announced, his voice carrying its familiar warmth. Tell us, what's it like being part of the most famous family in the world? The question hung in the air. Standard, expected, safe. Kendall looked up at Steve, and for a split second he saw something that stopped him mid-smile. Her eyes held a depth of exhaustion that seemed impossible for someone so young, so successful, so seemingly blessed by every advantage life could offer. Kendall paused, her voice barely audible over the studio's ambient hum. It's complicated. The audience laughed, thinking it was another perfect celebrity deflection. But Steve didn't laugh. He'd heard that tone before, in his early days of stand-up, in late-night conversations with comedians who used humor to hide their pain. It was the sound of someone drowning in plain sight. The game began with its familiar rhythm. Survey question after survey question, the Kardashians dominated with the kind of strategic thinking that had made them masters of public perception. They knew their audience, understood how to play the game both literally and figuratively. But as the rounds progressed, Steve found his attention repeatedly drawn to Kendall. While her family celebrated each correct answer with choreographed enthusiasm, she offered polite smiles that never quite reached her eyes. When it was her turn to answer, she gave solid responses but with a mechanical quality that felt rehearsed, distant. It was during the 4th round that everything changed. The question appeared on the board. Name something that makes you feel invisible. Steve read it with his usual dramatic flair, but something about those words seemed to electrify the air. The Martinez family had control of the board, and they were building a solid lead with answers like being ignored and standing in a crowd. Then came the steal opportunity. The Kardashians huddled together, their voices a mixture of strategy and sisterly banter. Steve watched as they discussed their options, but his eyes kept drifting to Kendall, who stood slightly apart from the family conference. "All right, Kardashian," Steve called out. "What's your answer? What makes people feel invisible?" Kris stepped forward, the natural spokesperson, but before she could speak, something unprecedented happened. Being the quiet one in a loud family. The words came from Kendall, spoken so softly that for a moment, the studio wasn't sure they'd heard correctly. But Steve had heard. Every word, every nuance, every ounce of pain packed into that simple sentence. The production assistants in the control room stopped their chatter. Camera operators instinctively zoomed in, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Even the audience members in the back rows leaned forward, straining to catch every syllable of what felt like a confession years in the making. The audience began to applaud, thinking it was just another clever answer. But Steve didn't move toward the board. He didn't make his usual joke or offer his trademark reaction. Instead, he stood perfectly still, staring at Kendall with an expression that slowly shifted from surprise to understanding to something that looked remarkably like recognition. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Steve asked, his voice dropping to a register that cut through the studio noise. Kendall looked up, and for the first time all day, she seemed to truly see him. "Being the quiet one in a loud family," she repeated, her voice stronger now, carrying a tremor of vulnerability that silenced the audience completely. Steve set his cards down on his podium. Slowly, deliberately. The gesture was so subtle that most of the audience didn't notice. But everyone in television production knows that when a host puts down his materials, something unscripted is about to happen. "Is that on the board?" Someone from the Martinez family called out, trying to bring the game back to its normal rhythm. But Steve Harvey wasn't playing a game anymore. He walked toward Kendall, each step measured and purposeful. The cameras followed him, sensing that whatever was happening was more important than any survey answer or Family Feud strategy. "Kendall," Steve said, now standing directly in front of her, "how long have you felt invisible?" The question hit the studio like a lightning strike. This wasn't part of the show. This wasn't in the script. This was Steve Harvey, the man who'd spent 4 decades making people laugh, asking a question that came from somewhere deeper than entertainment. Kendall's perfectly composed facade began to crack. Her lip trembled almost imperceptibly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of years of carefully managed public appearances and private struggles. The studio lights seemed to dim around her, as if the universe itself was focusing on this singular moment of vulnerability. "Always," she whispered, her voice so quiet that the microphones barely caught it. "I've always felt invisible." The admission hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Here was Kendall Jenner, one of the most photographed women in the world, gracing magazine covers and walking runways from Paris to Milan, telling a room full of strangers that she felt unseen. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass, so profound it left everyone speechless. Steve moved closer, and in that moment, he wasn't a television host or a comedian or a performer. He was simply a man who recognized pain when he saw it. "But baby," Steve said, his voice gentle but firm, "you're standing right here. We can all see you." Kendall shook her head, and for the first time tears appeared in her eyes. "You see Kendall Jenner," she said. "You see the model, the Kardashian sister, the brand, but nobody sees just Kendall." The studio had gone completely silent. 300 people, cameras, crew members, even her own family, everyone was witnessing something raw and unfiltered that felt more real than anything that had happened on television in years. Steve reached out and took Kendall's hands. The gesture was fatherly, protective, human. "What does just Kendall want?" he asked. The question broke something open in Kendall that had been sealed shut for years. "To be heard," she said, her voice cracking. "To matter for something other than what I look like or who my family is. To have thoughts and opinions and feelings that people actually care about." Steve nodded slowly, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of someone who understood what it meant to be reduced to a single dimension. "I see you, Kendall," he said. "Not the supermodel, not the Kardashian, just you. And you know what I see? I see a young woman who's been carrying the weight of other people's expectations for so long that she forgot her own voice mattered." The cameras captured every second, but this wasn't about television anymore. This was about human connection, about the moment when someone finally says the thing that's been burning inside them for years. Kendall looked at her family, who were watching with expressions of shock and growing understanding. This wasn't the polished, camera-ready moment they'd all expected. Kim's hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with realization. Chloe had tears streaming down her cheeks, her usual humor replaced by raw emotion. Even Chris, the master of managing family image and controlling narratives, seemed speechless, her perfectly maintained composure cracking as she witnessed her daughter's pain laid bare. For years they'd all played their roles in the family dynamic, the momager, the business mogul, the funny one, the quiet one, but in this moment those roles dissolved, revealing the complex human beings underneath the carefully constructed public personas. "I love my family," Kendall continued, her voice growing stronger. "But sometimes I wonder who I'd be if I wasn't part of all this. If I could just be a regular person with regular problems and regular dreams." Steve squeezed her hands. What would regular Kendall dream about? For the first time all day, Kendall smiled. A real smile, not the practiced expression she'd perfected for cameras and red carpets. "I'd want to write," she said. "I'd want to tell stories about real people with real struggles. I'd want to use words instead of just my face." The admission was like watching someone remove a mask they'd been wearing for so long they'd forgotten what they looked like underneath. Steve turned to address the entire studio, his voice strong and clear. "You know what we're going to do here today? We're going to forget about this game for a minute. Because sometimes the most important victories happen when you stop playing by other people's rules and start honoring your own truth." He walked back to his podium, but instead of picking up his cards, he addressed the cameras directly. "This young woman just showed more courage in 5 minutes than most of us show in a lifetime. She reminded us that behind every image, every brand, every carefully crafted public persona, there's a human being with dreams and fears and hopes that have nothing to do with fame or fortune." The Martinez family, who had been silent witnesses to this entire exchange, began to applaud. Slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm, the studio audience joined them, and soon the entire room was filled with the kind of applause that comes not from entertainment, but from recognition. The acknowledgement of seeing someone's truth and honoring it. Kendall wiped her eyes, and when she looked up, she seemed different. Lighter somehow, as if speaking her truth had physically lifted a weight she'd been carrying. "Steve," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Anything, sweetheart." "How do you find your voice when everyone expects you to be quiet?" Steve smiled, and in that smile was 40 years of experience, of struggle, of learning to transform pain into purpose. "You start by speaking one true word," he said, then another, and eventually you realize that your voice was never missing. It was just waiting for the right moment to be heard. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone in that studio knew they were witnessing something that transcended television. This was the moment when Kendall Jenner stopped being a Kardashian commodity and became simply, powerfully, herself. The transformation was visible. Her posture straightened, her breathing deepened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she looked directly into the cameras not as a brand ambassador or a reluctant participant, but as a young woman who had finally found the courage to exist on her own terms. When the episode finally aired, it broke every viewership record in Family Feud history. Not because of celebrity appearances or viral moments, but because audiences recognized something rare and precious: authentic human connection in an age of manufactured reality. Social media exploded with messages from viewers sharing their own stories of feeling invisible, of being the quiet one, of struggling to find their voice in a loud world. The survey answer, being the quiet one in a loud family, wasn't on the board. But that day it became the most important answer anyone had ever given on Family Feud. Not because it won points, but because it reminded everyone watching that sometimes the most profound victories come not from playing the game, but from having the courage to speak your truth, even when your voice And in that Atlanta studio, on that Wednesday afternoon, Kendall Jenner found her voice. Not as a model, not as a Kardashian, but as herself. Just Kendall. And that, Steve Harvey knew, was worth more than any game show prize could ever be. In the weeks that followed, Steve would receive thousands of letters from viewers who had felt invisible in their own families, their own lives. But he would always remember this moment as the day he learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't laughter or entertainment. It's simply seeing them for who they truly